Hi, everyone. Matt Byrne here with the Fearless Entrepreneur Podcast. This week's episode is all about how to create a company culture that fosters a good working relationship with the people you employ and the clients you attract. So let's get started.
Because of the world I live in, I bring in a lot of subcontractors, freelancers, that kind of thing. And I'm constantly dealing with the notion of, well, what if they aren't a good company fit? I'm not really going to explore that too much because they're not going to be with me day in, day out. They're probably going to drop in and work on a job for a couple of days. And I've got to figure out very quickly if I feel like they're going to be a good fit. That's kind of a big fear of mine, actually, because I'm like, well, if I end up with someone who is completely different than what I anticipated in a meeting, that could be detrimental to a project I'm working on, and I need a good team environment.
Yeah, you're talking about being discerning about your company and how it chooses which companies it wants to do business with based on fit. And I think that's an underlooked and underserved part of our, when we're talking about culture, we rarely are talking about culture as a way to discriminate or avoid working with toxic companies that don't fit our culture. Certainly, having an internal culture and getting our employees to fit our culture and hiring for fit, super important. We're going to talk about that in the episode. But tell us more about, Matt, your experience with a company that you didn't feel met the culture and how you dealt with that.
So in this particular case, it was something that, a product that they sell was not something that our staff, the people that are working on some of the core things, supported or liked or, could get behind. And I'm always asking my team and myself to sort of push through that. We don't have to necessarily be the users of those products or those services. Because we can be objective, as marketers, we're always having to tap into our inner schizophrenic, if you will. We need to be able to be objective. Can we help move the needle? And having those conversations with the team, and I've got, some young people on the team that helping them to understand that, and that could find a place where, well, you know what, actually, I can see where that person's coming from and who the end customer is going to be. And so we worked through it, found a good commonality among the team, and was able to then take on the client, engage the client, and starting to work and do some things for them.
Yeah, I remember somebody said, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you'll settle for. But yeah, it's important to define what those boundaries are. And I guess, what gives me pause and what I'm fearing right now is, is my company living and behaving in accordance with the culture and values we've established? I always find that a struggle. You've got what you aspire to be, and then you have the what you really are. And we'll talk more about that in the podcast, because honestly, I don't have the answer, but I certainly would like to explore the topic. People put these, beautiful platitudes just spray painted or stenciled on their lobby walls, but they're not actually living that. If you get an honest assessment of what your culture is versus what you say it is, how do we remedy that disconnect? So that's a fear of mine and something I struggle with, and I'm trying to get better at and figure that out so we can maybe tackle that deeper into the episode. Well, everyone, welcome to episode 4 of the Fearless Entrepreneur Podcast. This week, we're talking about determining company values. Defining, implementing, and living by the values is critical to any entrepreneur's journey. Today, in this episode, we're going to be talking about ways to improve the process for understanding what your values are and getting honest with where you are as it relates to achieving them. And also how to bring your employees into that conversation and attract the clients that you want to have in your business through your company values. I'm Matthew Byrne, your host, and along with me is Michael Lunt and Matt Adams. We each run our own businesses here in Dublin, Ohio, and we wanted to share our experiences with you to help you become a better business owner and a fearless entrepreneur. So company culture is a hugely important in today's business world, and some customers shop on the company's values and their principles, and some employees choose their employer based solely on a match in beliefs. So I'm curious as to what your experiences have been in this area as it relates to hiring your staff and the way you go out to the market.
Well, I've got experience really in both being employed at a company that wanted to build a culture and now owning my own. Like culture is a big part of what I want to instill in people I work with. It's important for me to know that the people I'm working with care just as much as I do about the work that we're doing. But on the flip side, I've worked at a place where they've tried to retrofit the culture and it just didn't take. Company culture is one of those things that you just can't buy. It needs to be grown and it needs to be cultivated within the organization and things like that. From my standpoint, working with freelancers, as I mentioned earlier, it's so important that the people I work with share a common interest in the work that we're doing. Creating really cool videos for customers that they can actually use and not trying to go overboard with, the artistic nature of something at the expense of the content that we're trying to create. When I try and find someone to work with Parasol Media, I try and find someone that has shown an interest in contacting me and shown an interest in what we stand for, and hopefully has created some content that almost matches what we've done in the past. So that's kind of big for me, and that belief kind of stemmed from where I worked previously and kind of their approach, which in my opinion just didn't work. We've all been there where we've worked for companies where they've sent you on these training courses and then all of a sudden Monday morning they're expecting you to implement it 100% and change your way of thinking. And it's not that simple.
There was this great presentation called The Brand Gap several years ago, and anyone kind of in the marketing space probably remembers it. But I remember it talks about what a brand is, and I think a lot of people are confused about what a brand actually is, and this presentation does a great job of demystifying it. But the end game is that the brand isn't what you think it is. It isn't your company logo or letterhead. It's not your stationery. A brand is what your customers think about your company. And culture, in my opinion, is what your employees think about your company. So the brand is how the customers think about you, and culture is how your employees think about you, or what you stand for as a company versus what you stand for, in the minds of your clients. They are inexorably connected. And so Matt Adams, being .the creative, is kind of an innovator as it relates to marketing strategy and these types of things. So I'd imagine that you've got a lot of experience and thoughts about helping people tap into their brand, which is a close cousin to that of culture. So tell us a little bit about what you've discovered along the way, Matt.
Yeah, I can let me back that up first and talk a little bit about when I set my own company culture. When I started off, man, there's no company culture. It was me. It was how I approached my work and how I approached life, and that I guess was sort of the foundation for when I started hiring employees. I needed to set this company culture, and the process that we took at .the Creative was to define what was important to both me as a business owner, but also to remember what it was like as a young designer that was just starting out. And then with the whole team, we talked about who it was that was our ideal client, right? And then we discussed, well, what was it that made them so ideal? Beyond, okay, yes, they paid on time, that ideal customer, sure. But beyond that, and we talked it out and we understood who we were, who our clients are, and then who we wanted to be. And then from that's where our core values came. And this is the same process that we're going to go through with our clients. I want to understand what it is that you think you are, right? What's your company's personality? What's your company's internal brand? And then does that jive with what is the client's view, what the brand is in public for your company? We got to make sure operations is in sync with with marketing. And so there's different exercises that can be done that you can help us, learn that. There's a lot of great tools out there. And through this process, we learned, there were, several things for us that were important. We knew that learning was a top thing for us internally. Creativity, of course, being the business that we're in, and customer education. That's taking that time to not just throw a strategy or throw a tactic at a client, but rather helping them to understand why we're making the decisions we're making, having them part of those decisions. So customer education was big. And then, of course, flexibility and family, having that work-life balance. We knew that was something that was going to be important to us as a company because it was important to me as a young designer. I've talked about it in previous episodes, the experiences that I had where, you're working 12, 13, 14 hours a day and, the work-life balance isn't there. But then lastly, discipline, authenticity, and most importantly, collaboration. Those were our core values that we set. And that came through a process that we learned what was important to us. And we strive to live those every day. We fail on occasion, but as long as we're striving and pushing towards that, I think that's one of the main things that a company needs to determine. What is it? Even if you're just yourself, if it's just you, and you do have plans to grow beyond the technician of the business, you need to take this step. I think it's an important thing to establish for your vision.
I'm in the employee benefits space, and one thing that we're always coaching clients on is hiring for fit. I think it's great to establish what your company culture is. The vision and mission and branding and culture. These things are all inexorably twined together. But establishing what honestly is your culture and what are some of the words that you use to define it. One of the things that I think is really important are what are the behaviors or actions how do you describe the behaviors and actions of those words? Like Matt, you mentioned, educating your customers. That's one of ours as well. Educating to the point of transparency is what we call it. But the behavior might be is that always take the time to explain to the point of total clarity and transparency for the client, or you kind of, because giving people big fancy words doesn't necessarily remind them of how key that is to your culture, but sometimes giving them an action or behavior. What does that look like when someone's doing it? If you can give that language, that extra wording, I think it really demystifies what your culture is for your people. And then regarding hiring for fit, I think too many companies miss the opportunity to take these words of culture, these mission and vision, not just to share them with the market, with your customers, with your future employees, but more importantly, to create an interview question that tries to extract whether this person is going to fit your culture. If innovation is one of your words, it's not one of ours. What questions would you ask a potential new hire to see if they're a person who values innovation? What sort of continuing education classes do you take? Are you studying anything on the side, to help up your game? What's the latest technology that you've adopted that, are you an early adopter or late adopter? I mean, there's a host of questions that you can kind of extract from them, whether they're a fit. So developing those questions to dovetail with your culture statements or these words and behaviors that define your culture, I think is really, really important and really valid. Mike, any horror stories or mistakes in culture, or Matt? I mean, have a company you've worked with where you knew they had a disconnect or a problem, or a coworker in a past job, or within your existing company who wasn't a cultural fit, and how that hurt?
I mean, I think for me, it was I'm big on accountability. So, and accountability isn't this negative word where we point the finger at someone when something wrong happens. To me, accountability is just about committing to something to allow someone to hold you accountable. So, for example, if I'm going to write a proposal for someone, I'm going to tell them, expect the proposal, say it's Wednesday, expect the proposal by Friday at 5 p.m. And then to me, I've got a deadline to meet. I've self-imposed that deadline. And if it's 5 o'clock and I'm still nowhere near done, it's then my job to communicate that to my prospective client and inform them that there's going to be a time change. And that allows them to move on with their day. So for me, I tried to instill that in the company I worked at, and it just wasn't getting through. I'm a big believer that, you impart based on doing. So if you want people around you to adopt your way of thinking, just keep doing it until people start to realize that sending me an email back saying, I'll get you that by the end of the day. Well, what time is that? That's not a time. That's very vague. So by me saying, sending a response saying, well, is that 5 p.m.? Is that 6 p.m.? And getting them to pin down an exact time, eventually they will realize that when they email me, they need to just tell me a straight time. Otherwise, we're going to do this back and forth until I get an actual time. So where I struggled was when a company and the staff that I was working with just wasn't integrating with that way of thinking. And it's really important because when you are clear and concise to a client, they appreciate it. They don't need to worry. They don't need to be concerned about when around the time that they're going to receive something from you. They know that they're going to get it at a certain point. And if you keep delivering on those deadlines, they have no reason to be concerned. And you just create this really nice culture between you and your client. So the horror story for me is probably just, it's not really a horror story so much as it's just an unfortunate event where those around me that I was trying to get involved in this culture just didn't want to do it. It's a little bit easier. It gets you off the hook, I think, a little bit. If you say, oh, I'll get it to you ASAP. You get to be vague. You get to get it to them when you think it's appropriate. Whereas when you pin down an exact time, well, now you've got a commitment. So yeah, that's kind of what I've experienced with it.
When you think horror story, we years and years ago worked in this sign shop as a designer, and one of the owner's wives worked there, and we always had this great, in the shop, the six of us, great culture, talked, communicated real well together, but in this particular situation, the spouse would come in and immediately upset the apple cart because she wanted to talk the dreaded P word, politics, and would engage people to the point where, and this is just right at the time where things became just, if you're talking politics in the office, stop it, or at least have a place where everyone can speak to the topic and everyone can leave there happy, fine. It rarely happens, but if you have that situation, wonderful. That was not the case with us, and that affected the culture so much that it destroyed the team. And the big lesson you learn from that is don't do it or you'll get fired. Case in point, I'm now a business owner, but that's very real stuff. You think you're having a civil conversation and someone doesn't get offended until they get offended.
Yeah.
I'm sure our listeners have encountered the same sort of scenario at some point, whether they were the perpetrator or the listener or the person that was offended. It's tough. It's very tough.
Well, I think as well, just kind of to piggyback off that point of discussing politics in the office, I think there's a way to do it and there's absolutely a way not to do it. If your goal is to switch someone to your side or to just talk at someone and not listen to their view, just don't bother, because all you're going to do is instill this real visceral anger in the office that's just got no place there. Now, on the flip side, if your goal is to just learn about someone, that's no real difference than asking where they grew up or, what their parents do for a living. You're just getting more of an insight into who they are as a person. That's perfectly okay, but you have to know how to talk about that kind of, it's no different than talking about someone's religion or something like that. These are very deep rooted feelings that people have, and some would argue that politics has no place in the workplace. Well, I would say it's a very important part of what makes someone tick. It's a big part of their personality, and so by having a meaningful conversation about those things really helps you to get to understand someone. So I'm not a fan of the no politics in the office, but I am a fan of well-meaning, just deep insight into someone and being respectful. That's a big big part of it. You have to be respectful.
Yeah, you don't have to believe the same thing I believe for us to have a good culture. In fact, it's funny. My Vistage chair, Perry Mommer, says he has a joke. It says, "You either agree with me or you're wrong." That's not what he believes. He coaches other leaders on don't be that guy. But it's okay to disagree. In fact, in the show notes, I'm going to put one of my favorite books is called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Lencioni, I believe is the author's name. And he talks about this like artificial harmony and this absence of trust. And, there are these people who will go into a meeting and they'll sit there and hear, the director of sales is, thoughts on how to move forward, or the CEO's next big vision. And they won't agree, and they'll kind of quietly nod their head and say yes. And then the minute they get out of the room, they start sabotaging the project. So instead of going in there and having the confidence and the culture that would allow you to say, I'm not okay with that direction, I think that's a mistake. Even if we don't go with your idea, you feel that you get heard, you were part of the process. And what's most key for a successful team is at the end of that we agree to move forward together regardless. We live in a wonderful democracy. It has its ups and downs, and, depending on which party you favor and which person's in the White House will affect your mood and opinion. But what we do, a great thing in this country, for the most part, when someone else wins, the other person graciously says, you know what? We're all Americans. We're all rowing in the same direction. We're all trying to accomplish the same things. We have different styles and methods to do it, right? So America is a good example of that. And I think your company needs to have that same culture. It's like, let's fight it out in the boardroom. And when we've collaborated to say, this is the direction we're going, whether it be the leader who has the decision-making authority makes the final call, or it's brought to a vote, that everybody who's in the dissenting voice is heard, but then ignored, and we work together on solving this. It's not like if we have a board of 10 people and 8 of us say, let's go forward, that the other people have permission to not participate or sabotage. They have to put down their arms, lay down their weapons, and move forward together. So The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team is a great book. The other thing about culture, it's a little overplayed, but worthy of mentioning, Simon Sinek's Start With Why. I think if you can define why your company's here, what problem you're solving, what great thing that you're trying to do to the world, and you can get in touch with that, you start attracting people to your company who believe that same thing. You start being very clear in your voice and vision about, how you're going to do great things, and your culture quickly will follow if you just get the why done correctly. So that's another great book I recommend. All right. So before we wrap things up, let's just do a couple of quick takeaways for the audience before we finish.
Yeah. I think for me, authenticity and to be honest with yourselves and your team, and by extension, your client. That's the key.
And for me, it's all about accountability and making sure that you're communicating with those customers and instilling that in your team and making sure that they're doing the same thing. You're kind of empowering them in that respect.
For me, it's, defining the why and then articulating that culture with actions and behaviors of that particular word or phrase, what that means in your company, and then creating a hiring process that tries to attract those types of people. Perry Mothmer of My Vistage, he also has a statement that says, you get hired for what you can do, you get fired for who you are. Right? You get hired for fit. You get hired because you're not a good person or that you don't believe what we believe. And, I think it's important to have civil discourse and to agree to disagree and then resolve together to move forward for the better of the company. And if you can do that, I think you have a pretty strong culture. So thanks for joining us. This podcast is available on Apple, Google Play, Spotify, and iHeartRadio, and wherever else you get your podcasts. We encourage you to subscribe to hear the latest episodes as they are released. And don't forget to give us a review. It'll really help us out to reach more entrepreneurs like you.
If you guys have a topic that you would like for us to discuss, please post it in the comment section below on our Facebook page. Shoot us an email, send a smoke signal, whatever. Just let us know. We'll talk about it.
And don't forget that you can follow us on Facebook at the Fearless Entrepreneur Podcast. And you can also read more about us on our website. It's thefearlessentrepreneur.podcast.com.
That's all from us this week. So until next time, stay fearless.